We might be on introduction part 37. We don't know.
Yeah.
We'll see how it goes.
No, we can't do that. Bisexual lighting.
You're listening and you have thoughts and you want to share them with us. And we love that.
Oh, sure. Put me on the spot. Why don't you?
Susie sells seashells by the seashore.
No, she doesn't.
Because it's going to be great. And I think you're going to enjoy the heck out of it. Welcome back to Write Out Loud. I'm Matt Kassem, and I'm here with the esteemed
Christina Trebascus.
Christina Trebascus, yes.
AKA Tina.
It's my favorite. Yes, indeed. We are back again, and this week we are focusing on part 2 of the introduction to what this podcast is all about, what you can come to expect out of Write Out Loud. And when we ended last week, we were talking about what? What do you remember from last week?
I don't remember anything from last week. I didn't know there was going to be a quiz. You didn't warn me. I've got my notes for this week, not last week.
That's part of my trick.
Because
I don't remember either.
We talked about Heartstopper and why we decided to focus on Heartstopper for our first foray into writing. It got to be so long as to why we decided to do Heartstopper, because there was just too much stuff.
Too much to talk about. Too much to
talk about. And now we're going to have too much to talk about in every single episode. But because we're trying to keep them down to the 30 minutes, because I only have an attention span of 30 minutes.
You and me both.
Yes. This week, though, I do want to touch on a couple of things with why we're doing Heartstopper. And one of the reasons why for me, which was super important, is the impact of Heartstopper and Alice's book. Series, everything that she writes very much has a huge impact, certainly on reading and the publishing industry first, and the LGBTQIA plus community, which is going to be a big focus of where we take the future podcast too. But for me in publishing, I can take us back all the way to pre-Harry Potter, when I was still working at my local bookstore at the time while I was in college, and Harry Potter coming out. And there is a distinct before and after Harry Potter. Harry Potter was not just a publishing phenomenon, in a book series. It changed readers. It changed the face of the readers that were coming in and the kids that were coming in. And the fact that you could have young kids coming in asking for it and 80-year-old readers that would be like, okay, I'm going to read this Harry Potter thing.
My grandkids love it, and I want to know what it's all about.
Yeah. I actually feel like we're going to see something similar with the before and after of Heartstopper. Mm-hmm. I think it's going to have such an impact on the publishing industry that things are going to shift and change. And I think we're already seeing that in the number of books that have not just side piece characters that are LGBTQIA. Normally there's going to be an Isaac as the sidekick. Okay. But they're never going to be the starring role. And if they are the starring role, it's going to be put into a particular section.
Sure.
So in other words, again, from my bookseller perspective, back in the day, anything LGBTQIA, including fiction, would have been sectioned completely outside of fiction. Mm-hmm. It would have been in with, I don't know, a section of self-help or something, or right next to self-help, or
like sexuality.
Yeah. Or it would have had its own subsection within fiction. But I think there is now going to be so much content that it's just going to be mainstream. Bookstores will no longer go, okay, this has a subcategory of LGBTQIA. So to put that into perspective, Netflix has an entire category for LGBTQIA. At some point, we are going to see that shift as well. And it's just going to be absorbed by the rest of the categories. Do you see what I'm saying with that? Where, again, just from my experience within publishing and seeing different dynamics, I mean, there is certainly self-publishing, pre-internet was...
Don't do it.
Like,
don't do it. Yeah.
Don't do it. It's vanity publishing. It is never going to make you money. It's never going to be sold in bookstores. It's never going to be ad whatever. But then digital reading came around, and at first there weren't many digital readers, and then there were too many digital readers, and then of course that narrowed down again. But I think this is going to be another similar shift in publishing where you can see a direct correlation of before and after. And the reason why Alice was able to do this is because prior, people understood LGBTQ characters to be something other than. But with her writing, her entire backlist, including Heartstopper, that's the world. Her world has it all in it. It is just part of her world. And I think once it just becomes just part of a world, then society can kind of go, oh, okay, this is how it goes.
Like it's
I also
just a
think
thing
it's partially, I think it's also partially generational.
Sure.
I think we're going to see that change in publishing because young readers are demanding it. They're not purchasing things that aren't inclusive.
Yeah, I think we're seeing that shift already too. We were just at Barnes and Noble not that long ago, and even in a lot of their main sections, there were books interspersed, right, and recommendations by the staff in fiction and nonfiction, and like it was just everything was kind of placed all about. So it wasn't necessarily a section that you'd go to that was just for LGBTQIA, which was kind of nice to see, right? It's all kind of in there, and you find it as you peruse through different titles.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things that's a fundamental shift. And, my generation calls it the yellow Volkswagen Beetle, situation. Are you seeing it because you've noticed yellow Volkswagens and now you're seeing them everywhere? Or is it the opposite? You're seeing yellow Volkswagens because they're everywhere. I don't know if it's because I enjoyed Heartstopper so much. I am now noticing the number of shows and books that have LGBTQIA characters in them. But I think there's a little of both happening here. Yes, I have set out to look for it, but I also think it's also happening more because it's there.
Absolutely.
It's there.
Yeah, I definitely think there's a big shift. And we saw that too with some of even the mainstream TV shows. I mean, you used to have Will and Grace, which was one of the first major shows that had a character that was LGBTQIA right front and center, right? And then you start kind of moving into other shows like that. And there's certainly plenty of movies that have come out now that are the main character is LGBTQIA without being a trope, without being any kind of like major stereotype. And it's just interesting to see that shift kind of take place across mediums too, not just even in writing.
Yeah. And I think you hit the nail on the head with it's not just a trope. And I think that is what I'm talking about at the absolute core. It is now mainstream and not a trope. And I think Alice is going to have that sort of impact, which leads me to my second thing, which is the LGBTQIA impact. And it's specifically the A part of it, because she brought that to the forefront, the asexual part of the community. And I think it is still a largely, I wouldn't say ignored, but I also wouldn't say totally inclusive. And I don't think it's because people shorten the LGBTQ and don't include the IA, but I also think it is from within the community too. I think the part of the community that's like is asexual part of LGBTQ. And I think Alice is totally showing that, yes, it's absolutely fundamentally a part of that you can't not include it because those people exist. The reason they are included is because they are ostracized by society. And they're even being ostracized from within the community. So therefore it's kind of like it's a catch-22 for those in the community that are like, oh no, asexuals don't belong in this part of it. I think that in itself speaks for why they should be included. But I think, overall, it's because they are misunderstood. like gay, lesbian, transgender, queer umbrella as well. So I think that's going to be part of her impact. And one of the things that I will talk about in future episodes is the fact that knowing Alice being out as asexual, I had no idea that an asexual person could write one of the best love stories that I've ever read.
Yeah.
This romance loving chick who's been reading romance since the age of 14. But yeah, so I think that's again why she has such an impact. And I think the impact is going to be much more far reaching than we can even discuss here in this podcast, because I think it takes time to completely understand someone's impact. But I think one of the reasons she is going to be so influential in the future is because she is presenting it again. This is the world that she lives in, that exists, and that in itself makes it mainstream.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting that, I mean, you think about just in the vein of representation, in the vein of, somebody who represents a particular segment of a group or a particular demographic. It's interesting to think about that. I think there's discussion in certain circles that certain types of people can't write about other certain types of people.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Like that, because you don't live that experience, you don't know the experience, you can't do it justice because you don't live in that. And I think that this is one of those situations that proves that a storyteller can tell any kind of story and do it justice. They can tell any kind of story that they want to tell, and they can do it justice. They can do the research, they can speak, because we like we talked about last week, for you to be a solid writer, for you to be somebody who can really write material that connects with your audience, you have to understand how people think.
Yes.
And at its core, people think very similarly, even though they have differences like sexual preference, differences in religion, differences in the way that they express themselves and their gender identity. Like there's still a fundamental humanness to all of it. And as long as you can understand that, and as long as you can play to that, like you have an ability to tell a story. Certainly you want to do it in a way that is thoughtful, in a way that is, perhaps thought provoking, but in a way that does that group, it does them true. Like it really holds true to who they are as people, that you have spent the time to kind of nurture and develop those characters.
Yeah, there's a couple of thoughts with that too, where Alice, even though she belongs to the LGBTQIA community, she also is white. And she is writing different races. And in fact, you could probably go through a checklist of different ethnicities, and she possibly has covered it. So she is stepping outside of the box.
Sure.
Because you could make the argument that, she's part of the LGBTQIA community, so therefore she understands the community, so she can write about the community.
Yep.
But on the flip side of that, there is the ethnic voices that she is also in some way representation and giving them a voice. It's interesting that you should also bring this up, because I just had this conversation with one of my clients today, because she is white and she is absolutely afraid to write ethnicities outside of her own. Because of all the backlash a couple years ago within the romance community, that ethnic authors felt that they were not being represented.
Sure.
Within literature. There was also a section of them that didn't feel that white writers should be, writing them. But at the end of the day, I don't know how you feel about it, but I have all of that in my community. I have racially different friends. As long as I remain in that world I'm going to continue to write about, because that's the world in which I live. And I think Alice probably feels similarly. I would not be surprised at all if she had racially different community within her own world. So it's interesting, that being representative of that, it's a slippery slope, because I can certainly understand, someone of a different race writing. I do have clients that are. And when we discuss, different things, I'm coming from my white background and they're coming from their background. So it's it's a slippery slope because on one hand, you need to make progress and we can't whitewash books.
Mm-hmm.
We
Absolutely.
cannot whitewash books.
Yep.
It's difficult because I want a Black woman to be writing about her experience because I'm going to view that differently. This is what actually last week I edited a book for one of my clients who happens to be Black, but we did talk about some of the things that I wouldn't have known from my white perspective.
Sure.
So I think it's important to have those conversations, to have those people represented. So giving them a chance to write and represent their own race, I'm 100% for. And I will always be a cheerleader for getting their work out there and doing the best job that I can to, do my job for it. But I'm also going to encourage white writers to not whitewash the books because I don't think that serves anyone either.
Yeah.
So, and I think again, that's the impact of Alice because she did bring that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's a situation where as long as you're not using and resorting to the tropes and the stereotypes, that you are writing about the experience of life. And the experience of life is mixed up in a whole lot of different areas. I mean, there's just different people everywhere you look, right? Of different creeds, different nationalities, different origins, different sexualities, different gender identities, like everything. We're all kind of mixed together. And it never made sense to me that there was that argument of like, well, no, you should only write about characters like you.
Yeah.
That's like, well, that would make a really boring story, I think, because
I agree.
I don't know. It just, to me, it doesn't really make sense. Again, I think it just has to be done tastefully, thoughtfully. It can be thought provoking as long as you're not resorting to those tropes or those stereotypes.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it would help too. I'm not sure that I totally believe in, sensitivity readers because again, you're only getting that one person's perspective. Well, on one hand, you can say, okay, I passed it by. Maybe there's nothing offensive in there. I do think that there are a lot of writers groups and that if you become part of one that is racially, sexual orientation, all those different minorities, you're able to maybe go in there and ask some questions or listen to your racially diverse friends.
Sure.
Or ask them to read it, because they're probably going to be the one that's more supportive and being able to say, hey, this is actually really going to offend, someone of my race.
Yeah.
So, but
like this
I think
isn't
it's
truly how it is. This is a stereotype.
Yeah.
Like you've landed in a situation where this is not true to life, really.
Yeah.
And really just kind of cast this group in a bad light for whatever reason. I think too, there's an opportunity there was it Andy Weir who wrote The Martian, right? He went to Reddit and was not telling them about the story itself that he was writing, but basically ran almost everything in the book through the Reddit community from a science perspective. Yeah. And wrote, and I believe it was Andy Weir. I'm not entirely sure, but I'm going to go with it for now until I find out otherwise. But had gone through and was just saying, like the character finds himself in this type of situation, like, what are the possibilities? Like, what can we do with this or not do with this? Or I've done this with this character. They're in this position. This is their response. Does that make sense? Like scientifically speaking, does that make, a lot of sense?
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think they did it. I don't think he did it with the entire book. I think he did it pieces of it, but I think there's some value in that, right? Running it by that large of an audience without giving away an entire book and saying, hey, I've got this, this character. I want to do this thing. Give me honest feedback. Like, is that something that would happen? Is that something that's just more kind of a canned situation?
Yeah.
Like, what does that look like?
I think you can absolutely do that in some circumstances, but it's one of those things that I would caution my writers to be careful of because you don't want to write by committee.
Sure.
Doing it for things that you maybe don't understand, perfect, wonderful. But when you can't make a decision,
yeah, for sure.
That's one of those things because, a lot of times writers will actually fall into write by committee by mistake because they're really trying to please their readers. And so they're taking the reviews and they're combing them over and going, I've got to do this. I've got to do that. I've got to. So yeah, I think it's a great idea, especially if it's something you don't understand.
Mhm.
Like for me, the science would be like, okay, I want to do this, but I have no idea what the science is. Let me go to some scientists and find out. Absolutely. 100%.
Sure. Yeah.
So
Yeah, I
yeah.
definitely think I agree with you. I definitely think don't write by committee. Don't do it because you don't know which way to go with it. But I think it is something where you go, I'm not entirely sure this feels natural. This is what I want them to do.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, based on their X factor of whatever that character is,
Yeah.
I'm not sure that this feels quite right. Can you give me some thumbs up, thumbs down? Like, what is this?
Yeah.
And I think it gives you an opportunity to stand outside of yourself a little bit too and take some of that feedback and go,
Oh yeah,
that's a bias of
absolutely.
mine that I've discovered, maybe, right? Like, oh, okay,
Yes.
got it. Yep,
Yeah.
I shouldn't have gone there.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's interesting.
Yeah. So I think I've said everything I wanted to about the impact of Heartstopper and Alice's writing. So the next thing that we'll talk about is actually where we're going to take the podcast, where we're going to go in the next several episodes, which I have a feeling is going to be more than several episodes.
We might be on
But
introduction part 37. We don't know.
yeah.
We'll see how
No,
it
no, no,
goes.
no. No, no, we can't do that. But some of the places we're going to take this, some of the things to look forward to are the themes in Heartstopper, representation, inclusion, which we touched on a little bit today, book to screen, comic to screen for Heartstopper, show versus tell. My favorite thing to talk about. It's actually something really hard to talk about because people, and especially with a show, people are going to be like, okay, isn't it all show because we're watching a show? No, no, no.
Nope.
Show versus tell. The conflicts, the villains, details. Heartstopper in itself is like an entire aesthetic, detail
Mm-hmm.
oriented show. Some of the things that I discovered in some of the research was just completely mind blowing. The number of things that they thought of, like bisexual lighting, anytime Nick was in a scene, kind of a thing. I mean, who thinks about that kind of stuff?
Right.
Well, the cast and crew apparently did with Heartstopper. So we'll go through some of that. Some other possibilities. Write to us. Tell us what you want to know about Heartstopper. What do you want us to talk about with Heartstopper? Also, do you want to be on the podcast with us? Do you have something to say about Heartstopper? Email and let us know. Super fans. If you know a super fan, if you are a super fan, if you want to come on and talk about Heartstopper, we'll talk about it to your heart's content. Come nerd out with people that are, as excited about the show and the books as you are. Writers, authors, if there's something that you want to talk about, like I know one of my authors that I've worked with in the past, she is a huge uh, um, advocate for LGBTQIA community, and I'd love to get her on the podcast. I'm going to contact her
Yeah.
once we get going here to talk about some things. And if you're a writer or an author and you want to come and talk about a specific thing, if you've got something in representation or book to screen or show versus tell, we'll put you in where you want to fit. Any of the cast and crew that would like to be on and talk about season 1, we promise we won't even ask you about season 2, or just ask you if you enjoyed season 2 maybe.
Yeah.
And Alice specifically, I mean, man, that would be a dream to have her on here and talk about something that she's passionate about and, how she feels about the success of how Heartstopper is impacting her. That would be wonderful as well.
That'd be amazing.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So
Even think about like a fans sound off type of
yes.
segment, right? Where if you have something you want to say, a comment you want to make about something that we've talked about, maybe in the beginning of each episode, we'll play a couple of them, but use the voice memos app on your phone and email it to us. You can email it to Christina at bookmatchmaker.com or Matt at writeoutloudpod.com, either one. And, you just might hear your voice come across a couple of these segments. You never know.
Yeah, Matt is the tech guru, so he will know how to do that. I only know how to plug in my microphone.
No worries. It'll be a fun
Yeah.
little thing to do, right? We'll hear
Yes.
from a collection of people that are listening to the podcast and want to have
Yes.
something to say about a segment.
And feel free to email us if you feel like there's something that we're forgetting or that we aren't talking about. And especially once we get started with the forthcoming episodes on particular subjects. If there is a subject that we aren't covering that you want to talk about, let us know. Email us at either one of those addresses. Find us on social media, and we will gladly talk about it.
Absolutely. We are always open to any kind of thoughts and ideas from anybody listening to the podcast, because you know what it means, that you're out there and you're listening and you have thoughts and you want to share them with us. And we love that. So
Yes.
again, Christina at bookmatchmaker.com or Matt at writeoutloudpod.com, either one. But send us your thoughts, your ideas, your comments, jokes, stories, whatever your little heart desires. We would love it.
Great.
We'd love it. Well, very good. I'm excited about that. What should we look forward to for the next episode coming up? What is the very next topic that we're going to cover?
Oh, sure. Put me on the spot. Why don't you? I actually think we need to dive right into the representation, especially since we touched so much on it today. I think actually that's going to be a subject we'll come back to and back to and back to, because that is the major impact of the show and the books, in my mind, is the way she uses that representation. The idea that the number of people that watched the show, even without reading the books, who said, I wish I had something like this when I was younger.
Mm-hmm.
I think that representation is the key to Heartstopper and its impact and its popularity and, all of the above. So I think that's where we need to start.
Yeah, I love that. Makes me think of the little videos of the little girls that look like Maribel from Encanto. And, they turn around and they're like so happy that they see a girl that looks just like them on TV, and it's the
on
main
TV.
character.
Yes.
How
or
exciting.
The little boy. I forget the little boy's name.
Yep.
The one that's having his
new powers.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. The impact of that representation within books, within TV shows, movies, etc.
That's excellent. Well, very good. Well, thank you, Christina, for wrapping up this introduction with me. I know that we split it into two parts, but it was worth the wait because we wanted to make sure we got everything out on the table so we could talk about what's up and coming, and we can make it, just whet your appetite just a little bit for what's to come, because it's going to be great. And I think you're going to enjoy the heck out of it.
Yes. It gives me another excuse to rewatch Heartstopper again.
Well, I'm always down for that. So perfect. Again, email addresses, if you want to shoot us a note, Christina at bookmatchmaker.com or Matt at writeoutloudpod.com. You can also find Christina on what socials?
All of the different socials at Bookmatchmaker. Instagram is probably where I am most active. Yeah, Instagram.
Perfect.
Because I'm thinking, I think my Twitter account was suspended because I did something or other. I don't know. I think it's somebody else who's...
Oh, you pissed off Elon.
I know, that's what it is.
You pissed
All
off
of a sudden,
Elon.
now my Twitter is just blocking me. Anyway,
yep.
Find me on Instagram. How about you, Matt? Where to find you?
You can find me online at cassim@omg.lol or cassim.omg.lol, either way. And on Instagram at sarcasm, SARCASSEM. So we'll be there. Find us. We'd love to have a chat.
Hey, thanks so much for listening to the podcast. We really hope that you're enjoying every bit of it, but we would love to hear your feedback. Drop us an email either to Matt at writeoutloudpod.com or Christina at bookmatchmaker.com. We would love to hear your thoughts. What's working, what's not working, and what do you want to hear more of? Thanks so much. We really appreciate it.